What's up, y'all? Lyric essay this week. We're going to make this one quick and dirty, but you're going to get a lot out of it. We're going to continue on with it next week as well. So, what is the lyric essay, right? What even is an essay? The lyric essay or the lyrical essay, it's a type of personal essay, right? And it combines both prose and poetry, but it's often crafted and created similar to a prose poem. So, in a lyric essay, as the writer, your job is to recreate the experience and evoke emotion in the reader by using sensory details, a description that expresses what the writer, what you see, what you hear, what you feel, you taste, you touch, all those things. Next week, also, we're going to go into a little bit more about how to show versus tell, how to embody in your writing, right? How to be embodied in your writing. It's really, really important. A lyric essay, there's really no organized narrative. It can be a structure for it, but it's not like one chronological event unfolding after the next. Instead, oftentimes the writer will create like a series of fragmented or segmented images, which is this is the way I write. Like personally, you can read any of my stories that are out there, and that's what I've done. Any of my creative nonfiction stories, that is, right? The fragmented pieces using imagery and poetic language, you put them together, and you have an essay, right? Because there's no clear defined structure. Essentially, it's like an anti-essay in that it blurs the boundaries between poetry and prose, but steers clear of things like defined paragraph and theses and conclusions and intros and all of that, right? A lyric essay should flow from here, this is my heart, right? It should flow from my heart, from your heart, and it should make the reader feel, right? So if you want some examples, I mean, like I said, you can look at some of the stuff that I've written, like Blue Skies and Britches, and there's some other ones, but those are lyric essays in that they are segmented or fragmented pieces that moments put together under an all-encompassing theme. Also, the work that we're going to read next week, Danielle Geller's work, prime example of lyric essay. True Blue for this week is a really good example. Next week, we're also going to get into look at, like I said, this is a 2-week sort of look at the lyric essay. There are some structures and things that you can use for a lyric essay, right? That people use, like I said, the fragmented, momentary ones. There's a thing called braided essay, which we'll look at more next week. There's also a hermit crab essay, which we're also going to dive in deeper to next week, right? But essentially, and there are ways to do those, ways to structure those, which I will look at them. But I want you to start with the experimental, because that's more than anything, that's what a lyric essay is it's experimental. It is whatever you want it to make it, right? It blurs the boundaries between poetry and essay writing, and in that boundary, in that third space, is whatever you want it to be, right? Importantly, though, the meaning accumulates in a lyric essay through the language, through the rhythm, through the syntax, through the imagery, the juxtaposition of images, association of images. And sometimes there's intuitive leaps, meaning sometimes things are left up to subtext. Sometimes we don't say everything that we need to say in this, right? But I think importantly, and I said this before, the meaning in a lyric essay is embodied and draws from the 5 senses, right? We should feel like the readers are experiencing the moment with the writer, right? Deborah Tall, one of my favorite writers, she writes about, she says, she describes the lyric essay as a kind of essay propelled not by its information, but rather by the possibility of transformative experience. So think about that, the possibility of transformative experience. I've talked to a lot of you in previous weeks about what is the why here? What is the significance of this story? A lyric essay is not a lyric essay without a transformative experience. It's not an essay without the why. So, think about that as you're writing these, right? As you're reading the examples for this week, but then also as you're writing. Another important thing to note about the lyric essay, right? When we think about essay, what do we think of? We think it makes a claim, makes an argument, backs it up with evidence. Not this one, right? The lyric essay doesn't claim, it doesn't argue, it might persuade, but it does so through suggestion, imagery, and making you feel. It mentions, but doesn't expound, meaning it doesn't go into ad nauseum and beat you over the head with its point. It allows you to come to the feeling of it yourself. Usually, like I said, through the imagery and the five senses. The beautiful thing about this, and I've talked about this in other lectures and also in some of the comments that I've made in some of your papers, is that the thing about being suggestive while suggesting for the why, right, and mentioning the why, mentioning the significance, suggesting the significance, and not just like coming outright and beating us over the head with it, is that it requires us as writers to really dive deep into our psyche and understand why a moment is significant. Because it's one thing to like just explain why something is significant. It's an entirely different thing to show us it in action. And that's the art of a true lyric essayist, is that they show us these things, right? So that not only does the writer understand it, the significance and the why, but so does the reader. So you got to write one this week. How are you going to start? Right. Well, I have some prompts there. You can look at them. They're really just meant to get you started. If you don't use any of my prompts any of the semester, I don't give a shit. To be quite honest with you, they are meant as a way to get you started. I just want you to write, and this week I want you to write a lyric essay. So how do you start writing one? Well, you can start with a narrative. Just don't do it chronologically. One way that I like to do it is to pick a moment. It's my personal favorite. It doesn't have to be yours, but it's mine. Pick a moment and blow up the imagery of that moment and make that moment stand in for all of these other moments that represent this significance. Does that make sense? Like, this moment represents all of that unworthiness that you felt, all of that, like, whatever that significance is, right? Maybe it's unworthiness. This moment stands in for that. And through the experience and reading in this moment, we can feel what you feel or felt in that moment, right? You can do a braided essay. We'll talk more about that next week, but there's stuff you can look ahead if you want. You can also do stream of consciousness and rant. That's also a form of a lyric essay. I will say, like the beats, like Bukowski did a really good job of this, but I rarely read good ones like this today. Doesn't mean it's not possible. I just rarely read it. So, lyric essay suggests, it doesn't claim, it mentions, it doesn't expound, it makes us feel, it is rooted in our why and the five senses and imagery. Go forth and conquer, man.